welcome to another episode of The Art of Advocacy. I'm your host, Dr. Sheldon L. Eakins. I am excited to be here. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to share with you some of my research, work that I've been putting in. It's been a really good week. I've found a lot of stuff fascinating, and I'm really excited to share this with you. By the way, if you're out there, feel free to say hello, say where you're watching from. Thank you for joining in. I'm excited again for this opportunity. We're going to pull up the slides here in just a moment. Today's topic is hugs, high fives, and homework. The attachment theory in the school universe. That's right. We're talking about the attachment theory today. Now, I'm going to share a little bit of how I got into this even idea of doing research on the attachment theory in just a moment. But that's what today's topic will be on. So feel free, as always, say hello and put in your comments, chat as well as we get going here. As always, just a reminder, the current book out is Leading Equity, Becoming an Advocate for All Students. If you don't have this book yet and you haven't, first of all, the question is, why don't you have the book? But if you haven't gotten the book, make sure you get that. It's a great summer reading for you as well. So also, if you have an idea as far as a topic that you want to have me discuss in regards to a sense of belonging, that is what we'll be talking about all this time. All summer, every week I'll be coming out. Sense of belonging is the topic. I'm in the process of writing a book, and I'm excited. I'm excited. This one's going to be some heat. I'm bringing some heat as well. So if you're interested in a topic, make sure that you shoot me something in the chat. Now, here's the thing. Today's conversation is kind of like a part one and of a part two. So as I was doing my research this week, I was like, yo, this is a lot to cover within a short time frame, 45 minutes to an hour. That's typically how long these webinars are. And so I'm kind of splitting this one up. So next week, I'll be talking about teacher plus student equals BFFs, unleashing the power of the ultimate duo for social emotional awesomeness. Okay, so that's next week's conversation. All right, so today we're going to kind of dig into the attachment theory. I'm going to give you a little background information. I'm going to nerd out just a little bit. I'm a history guy, so I'm going to share some historical stuff. And again, I just, how you rabbit hole stuff, you kind of go into I really dug into things today. So I'll be sharing that information with you as well. As always, arrive on time, be kind and respectful of others' comments and thoughts. Take turns sharing, bring questions, stay on topic, and let's have some fun. This is what we call a brave space. A brave space means that I'm going to share some my research, and some of this will be my opinions. I'll share some personal stories as well. As always, I'm a storyteller. So all of that will be shared with you. However, feel free to share. And if you have a difference of opinion, that's totally fine with me. It's totally cool. So I want you to know that this is a space for you to share your thoughts. All right, let's dig into today's agenda. We're going to start with principles of attachment theory. Then we'll move into attachment theory's impact on sense of belonging. As always, a reminder here, the formula, that is what guides us through this book and through the sense of belonging in general. The formula is a student must feel accepted, included, and supported. Can I have a sense of belonging without these three? You'll see how today's topic is going to tie into the formula: accepted, included, and supported. All right, let's get into attachment theory. Now, I'm going to share a little story about myself. Now, I found this book about 3 years ago. Now, typically when I read books, I typically like to read books that are audibles, right? Because I don't have the time to sit there and just, old school it and turn pages and things like that. I just don't always have the time. And so I listened to this book. This was very helpful. That's why I put in there a must have. If you're looking for a book, if you're thinking about relationships as an adult, right? And even probably might be helpful for your students, or if you have your own children, but definitely for the adult standpoint, this book really helped me out. It taught me a lot. It was so good that I went and bought the hard copy. And so I listened to it via Audible, and then I went and bought the actual copy of the book, and I read it that way as well. Because I was like, I gotta have this book in my hand on my library. So it's on my bookshelf right behind me. But this book was very helpful in so many ways when it comes to me understanding my own attachments and kind of understanding some information when it comes to relationships and previous relationships as well. Now, based off of the book, there are three different styles mentioned in the book. Right, the first one is anxious. Okay, so people that have the anxious attachment style, they crave intimacy. And so these are usually the individuals that are kind of seeking validation. If you're familiar with love languages, you might be thinking, words of affirmation might be something that might be related to something that shows me that you really do have those feelings for me. So they're often asking, or they're not sure, they're kind of not clear where things are in a relationship, and things like that will be part of that anxious attachment. The avoidant, however, attachment style are people that they prefer, like, I don't want to get myself tied down. I don't want to get locked into a relationship because they like the independency. They may be maybe they had a previous relationship that didn't go well, and so now they're a little timid, or maybe how they're brought up, things like that. Their attachment to their parents and those kind of things might. These are the individuals that are often, they're the last ones to get into relationships sometimes because they prefer to, it's too much pressure being in relationships and things like that. So that would be the avoidant attachment styles. Now, one of the things that I found interesting in the book that I read, the book Attached, was like if you're into dating apps, your Tinders, your Hinge, all those things. They said that the majority of the individuals that are in those dating apps are either anxious or avoidant. There's also a lot of research that talks about how anxious and avoidance kind of tend to attract to each other. So if you have an anxious attachment style and avoidant attachment style, you kind of get drawn to each other. Now, often those relationships have their challenges, right? Because you got one individual who's like constantly not clear or sure or need validation often about, where are we at in a relationship, and then you got on the other side, you got an individual that is total opposite of that, right? They're like, well, I don't really like, being in this relationship, and it's just always unclear. So you have one person that's not really clear on their intentions, and the other person is not really clear on where things are going. So you can imagine how the opposites can attract. Okay. And then the secure attachment style is where people feel totally fine and they're not really worried. They're happy to be in the relationships. And so this is where you want to be, is in a secure attachment style. Okay. Now, you might be asking, okay, Dr. Eakins, that's nice, but I'm happily married, or I'm not into, like, what does this got to do? What does this got to do with education? Are you telling us about intimacy and all this stuff? This ain't got nothing to do with education. All right, so I hear you. Okay, stay with me. Okay, stay with me. Everything has a reason. I don't just throw stuff together, throw slides together. Okay, everything has a purpose. Everything has a reason behind it. Okay, so I want to show you how all this relates. Okay. But first, I'm a history guy. I'm going to give you a little history lesson real quick. All right. So, going back to the 1950s, there was this individual. Let me show you so you can see this here. Dr. John Bowlby. He did a lot of research when it comes to children, for example, and attachments. Okay. So, a lot of the research that he did is called his evolutionary theory, for example, suggests that children come into the world biologically pre-programmed to form attachments with others because this will help them survive. Again, human nature. Now, if you were with me last week, we talked about security and safety, right? At the bare minimum when it comes to a sense of belonging. Now, Bowlby argued that a child forms many attachments, but one of these is qualitatively different. And this is what he called the primary attachment, or the monotropy. Okay. Now, Bowlby suggests that there is a critical period. So around 2.5 years old. If an attachment has not been developed during this time frame, then it may well not happen at all. And Bowlby later proposed a sensitive period of up to 5 years. Now, the thing about his research is based off of, he did a lot of work with infants, again, up to about 2 years old is kind of was his bread and butter. So you can imagine what he could determine based off of the young age, how a child's attachment is going to style is going to be. And then I'm going to share with you some further research that came along that kind of can predetermine how based off of those infant child attachments, how that impacts them as adults. But he came up with 4 different styles, if you will, attachments. Right? Proximity maintenance, which is the desire for children to be near the people they're attached to. It makes sense, right? Human beings, we as infants, we again, safety and security, we tend to draw towards the people that take care of us the most. Okay. And you'll see how this relates to teachers and principals and in school environments, right? The safe haven is a desire to return to the attachment figure for comfort and safety in the face of fear or threat. So when we think about trauma-informed care, when we think about challenges at school, for a lot of our students, let's keep it real, for a lot of our students, school is probably one of the safest places for them. Okay. A lot of our kids' backgrounds, I remember when COVID happened, it shut down our schools and how like a lot of our kids depended on food, breakfast and lunch to be provided for them, and they depended on other, their teachers and just the sense of safety and being around their peers, and how that impacted a lot of our kids during that time frame because those things were gone. Right. And I mean, thinking about the pandemic, like there was so much happening with the pandemic that we CDC was giving us new updates every 5 minutes. Seems like there's all these things different happening. But you can imagine how the safe haven, if our school is considered a safe haven for our students, right? Bare necessity is for our kids to feel safe. And now that's being taken away, and how that can impact the student's ability to thrive academically, not just academically, but also socially. Okay. Now, the next one is secure base. Okay. The view of attachment figures as a base of security from which children can explore their surrounding environments. And then the last one was separation distress, anxiety that occurs in the absence of the attachment figure. So, what happens when a young child doesn't see their parents? Okay. For example, the mom steps out the room, young infant. What happens in those type of things? That separation distress. How does a child respond in those situations? Oh, greetings, Dr. Bruce. Good to see you there. Thanks for joining us today. All right. Now, one of Dr. Bowlby's students, Dr. Mary Ainsworth, she continued on his research, and she's credited for a series of studies called the strange situation experiment. Okay? And from the strange situation experiments, we get those traditional viewed upon attachment theories. Okay. But what she did was she had the mother and a child in the room. And so they introduced them to a new room. So the child is playing with toys and doing a lot of stuff, having a great time. And then so what she did was she would give the parent a cue to exit the room. So now the child would leave the room, and then they would observe the child's response. Sometimes the child would cry. Sometimes the child would play. And then also she started implementing having a guest come in as well. So while the parent was in the room, or if the parent left, then that guest that was there would kind of still try to console the child. However, again, the child doesn't know who this stranger is, right? That's why it's called the strange situation experiment. Okay. And so based off of how the children respond in these type of situations comes the attachment style theories. Okay. So one is, again, the secure. This is the most common attachment style. Secure, right? Children with secure attachments feel upset when they are away from their caregivers, but happy when they are back together. These children are okay with seeking comfort and support from their caregivers when they feel scared or worried. Okay. Then there's the anxious avoidant. Children who have an anxious avoidant attachment style don't show preference between the caregivers and their strangers. This can happen when children have experienced abuse, neglect, or punishment. Right. So you can imagine how, I can think of several situations where I've had students that had the anxious avoidant attachment style. For example, I remember a child sharing with me. Actually, let me go back. I remember a situation where I had a student in my special ed program, and the teacher came and got her teachers came and got me and said, "Hey, Sheldon, I need your help because one of your students is having a hard time. I can't get them to come into the classroom." And so she told me a story about how student was running late, bells ringing, and the teacher's like, "Okay, time to come in the classroom." But what happened was, for some reason, the student was not ready to go in. So the teacher kind of coaxed her, touched her by the shoulder, and kind of like tried to usher her into the room. And that is when the student just flipped out, just don't touch me, just start screaming, hollering. And so now the teacher's coming to my room to try to get some support. So I run down there, I grab the student, and I say, "Hey," I didn't physically grab her, but I say, "Hey, come with me. Let's talk for a second." So we go to the room, and the student shares with me a story that she had. Now, this student had experience living in the foster care system. And so what happened was, when she remembers, as a young child, she was out on the playground and she was playing, and the child protective services individual came and took her, right? And she remembers, as she was on the playground, the CPS person comes and says, "Time to go. You're coming with us." And of course, she didn't know who this woman was, and she left her jacket on one of the swings. She tried to go back to get her jacket, but when she went to go try to get her jacket, that CPS person took her by the shoulder and ushered her towards the car. So that teacher, again, best intentions, had absolutely no idea of this backstory, just trying to get her into the classroom. And as a result, that moment triggered to that child her experience as a young student, and the trauma that was attached to that. Okay, so a lot of times we don't necessarily know the background stories behind our kids and what might trigger them and what type of challenges they might have, and their experiences growing up. But that would be one example of an anxious avoidant student. Okay. An anxious ambivalent student, for example, is a child who has this attachment style, gets very upset when their caregiver leaves, no matter how long it is. This attachment style is not as typical, and it happens when children can't rely on their caregiver. So there's the trust challenges, right? They're not really sure. They're not really sure as far as, is this an individual that I can trust? Or are you going to let me down? You think about those situations, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. But, there's I'll just say there's certain programs out there, teacher programs, that, you join their organization, and, you spend time, a couple years, 3 years, or whatever it is, and you work in these environments, often inner city, urban, I'll use the coded language, right? Urban schools, these kind of areas. And then you work there for a couple years or so, and then they'll pay your student loans back. But what happens? A lot of those teachers don't stay, right? A lot of those teachers will, do their time. I don't know, maybe that's not the best way to say it. They will spend their time to get their loans paid back, and then they will go off to another school. And I've had a lot of students will ask that same question as soon as that brand new teacher shows up: "How long are you planning to be here?" Because historically, they know there's so much churn, there's so much turnover with their teachers. There's always a brand new teacher every couple years. Teachers don't stay. Kids can see this, especially our schools that are like 6 to 12, right? I've seen these things where it's like they got a brand new teacher every year. And so a lot of times the students it's hard for them to connect with teachers because there's that trust. I don't know how long this teacher's going to be here. And so as a result, I may not just, the relationship is just not going to be as strong because there's some trust factors. Because these students have, in the past, I had a teacher that I really loved and they left. And this doesn't consider maybe how things might have been at home, where maybe there was some abandonment or some neglect feelings and things like that for them as kids, as even in a home situation. Now, school, again, being a safe place, the safest place for me, and then my teachers, the staff won't stay. So you can imagine how the anxious ambivalent, sometimes there's a lot of our students, again, background information that we may or may not be privy to, but sometimes students will ask those type of questions. How long are you planning to be here? Are you just here for a couple years? I know that students will know. Oh, are you part of this program? And if you're part of this program, they automatically write you off. And then as a teacher, you're trying to figure out, I don't understand why I'm having such a hard time with my students, why I can't seem to connect with my students. And the reason why it might be is because they don't believe that you're going to stay that long. Okay. So that is one example of what an anxious ambivalent attachment might look like. All right, the last one, which is rare, this is not as common. Again, the most common is the secure attachment style, but the disorganized. Okay, children with disorganized attachment styles don't display specific behaviors when separated from or reunited with their inconsistent caregiver actions, where the child sees their guardian as both a source of comfort and fear. Again, this one is not as prevalent, but this is one of the attachment styles that was discovered. Now, what should you be doing? Okay, so those are just a few of the attachment styles, and just a little bit of background. Again, I'm a history guy, so I had to go through the historical standpoint, but hopefully you could see how this relates to education, right? It says caregiver, right? But during those early childhood K-12 days, who are our students spending them, our children spending the most time with? All right, at school. Okay, so school again needs to be safe. It needs to be a safe haven for our students. Okay, again, in a situation in which all of our students feel as if they belong, a place where our students feel as if they can trust their staff, the caregivers, if you will. Those things are all important. So, what are some things that you should be doing? You're probably already doing. If you're watching this, if you're watching this, more than likely you're doing these things, right? You're making sure that you're developing relationships with your students. You show them that you care, not just by telling them that I care about you, but you're also taking the time to do it through actions, right? So I feel like maybe I'm preaching to the choir in this moment. However, maybe consider this as a reminder for you. Okay. Attachment theory suggests that healthy bonds between educators and children in the classroom can help lead to greater social emotional regulation, higher confidence in taking on new challenges, and even improved academic performance later in life. This stuff will follow a student, a child throughout their life. And this can easily be determined. I saw a study that said that based off of that attachment style that might be assessed early on, so like 1 to 2 years old, they were able to predict with 77% accuracy whether or not a student would drop out of high school or not, with 77% accuracy based off of this theory. Okay, so the research does support this. This is not just Dr. Eakins telling you attachments are important and relationships are important. There's research that supports this. Okay. Furthermore, relationships matter at the end of the day. The important thing about relationships is, again, it sets the tone. How one relates to friendships, school, staff, parenting, and relationships as adults. Okay, whether that's platonic or romantic, all of that can be connected to their attachment styles. So Thinking about it from a sense of belonging, going back to the formula, accepted, supported, and included. That is all part of it. Relationships matter. Next week, we'll be talking about the bond, right? The teacher student bond. But I can tell you, based off of what I've been researching this week, and I will be adding on to next week, that is crucial. I know this might sound like, oh yeah, we know that. But again, this is a reminder. The teacher-student relationship, that bond is very crucial. We've had those conversations where folks will say, I don't understand. I can't get Johnny to sit still, or I can't seem to get Johnny to engage in my classroom. But you ask Johnny's other teachers, we don't have that issue. Well, Johnny's our biggest, brightest, most helpful student. The energy is totally different. And well, sometimes we'll say, oh, well, I don't think Johnny likes math. Is it that he doesn't like math? Or is a relationship something that we can improve upon, which will engage Johnny? Are we bringing in content that's relevant to Johnny? And if we aren't, are there some areas that we can work on for growth? Okay. Most children fail in school not because they lack the necessary cognitive skills, but, and I highlighted this, because they feel detached, alienated, and isolated from others and from the educational process. There's that. I've read something earlier today. I hate the term at risk. Not one of my favorite terms, so I try not to use it. So let's just say there are individuals who need additional support. All right, from an equitable standpoint, we have students that need some additional support when it comes to attendance, when it comes to maybe even academic support, those kind of things. And often there's a story that's behind these things. Why is a student not showing up to school? Or why is a student getting into a lot of fights? Or there's something that's deeper in there. But sometimes we go into the reactionary mode and we forget to really find out what's really happening. And often, again, students, as that quote says, most children fail in school not because they lack the skills, but they're having a hard time connecting or feeling connected. They feel isolated, they feel alienated. Maybe their identity is not observed, or maybe they feel like, I have to be someone totally someone else. I don't get to be myself when I come to school. I get to be myself in my neighborhood. I can be exactly who I want to be. All my attributes, everything I'm interested in, all these things are like I feel very comfortable at home. I feel very comfortable in my neighborhood. But for some reason, when I come to school, I feel like I'm shunned. I'm alienated. Not only are my peers not connecting with me, but my teachers, everything. And so then we start to see challenges with attendance, things like that. Okay. Going back to the formula as we wrap things up. Student must feel accepted, included, and supported. Accepted, included, and supported. All right. Take a sip of water. I'm going to go into my final thoughts. Here's the thing. What you may not know about me is I have a fear, a very strong fear of bees. I'm terrified of bees. If I see one flying around, you swat them. That's not me. I'm running. I have I don't know if it's a phobia, if there's a beeophobia, whatever it is, but I'm terrified of bees, and here's why. When I was a little kid, one summer I was staying with my grandmother in Alabama, and was outside playing with my toys. My grandmother was cutting the grass, and when she was cutting the grass, she went over a bee's, I guess a bee's nest. Maybe it was yellow jackets or something, but they have their nest in the ground. I'm afraid of bees in general, but I think this was particularly a hornet's nest or yellow jacket. I'm probably yellow jackets now. I'm thinking about it. I was a little kid. She said, Sheldon, run into the house. I just went over this nest. You need to run in the house. And I was playing with my toys. I love my toys. I didn't want my toys to stay outside. And so what I did was rather than running straight into the house, leaving, dropping everything, running straight into the house, I went back to go get my toys. I was attached to those toys. And guess what happened? I got stung by the whole net. Like I got stung up. I had to go to the hospital and everything. Right? I got towed up by these bees, yellow jackets. I was willing to get stung just to save my toys. That's how attached I was. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Because I'm not saying you want your students so attached to your school or to you that they're willing to get stung. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that bond, that relationship that you have between your students and yourself, relationships, again, so important. It's almost as if, you know, kids will be willing to not, they don't want to let you down. They won't let you down. Okay. To this day, as an adult, if I see a bee, if I see a hornet, if I see a wasp, any of those things, I'm running from that experience that I had as a child. That was a level of attachment that I had. Okay. For the for those toys. So when we're thinking about what that looks like for our students, what it looks like for ensuring that again, a sense of belonging is there, we need to make sure that our kids are willing to or feel safe. I'm sorry, feel included, accepted, and supported. Next week, if you have, feel free to put it in the chat if you have any topics for next week or for future sessions. However, next week will be kind of part two. We'll dig deeper into the teacher and student relationships. Okay, so next week's topic is teacher and student. Teacher plus student equals BFFs, unleashing the power of the ultimate duo for social emotional awesomeness. Social emotional awesomeness. All right, so that will be next week. If you aren't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Again, we'll be doing new episodes every single week. I got some time for any Q&A. Thank you, Dr. Bruce, for great information. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. If you have any questions, any thoughts, anybody want to add to the conversation, feel free to put that in the chat. Again, I appreciate your time. I'll be posting a newsletter tomorrow. It's been a very interesting day as I've kind of been watching the news. I saw the Supreme Court overturn the affirmative action for higher education. It's and you know how I'm one of those confirmation bias guys. So I always jump into the comment. Anytime I see a news article that's posted, especially on social media, I like to see what folks are saying. And just the level of it's like almost like there was remember back in the day they used to talk about reverse racism and all that kind of stuff. Like they used to, so you see like folks that are saying, "Oh yeah, see, finally, no more discrimination." I'm like, yeah, I really don't know what you're talking about. So anyway, if not, no questions, then we're gonna wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for your time. Remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But by all means, keep moving. Let's continue to be a voice in leading equity.